And thank you all again so much for joining us for the first session of our volunteer engagement webinar series. Our 2023 series is on the 12 steps or 12 elements of effective volunteer management. Today we'll have an overview of all 12 steps or elements of volunteer management, and then dive into our first element, which is planning, of course. We're going to bring on Sarah, our School and Community Partnership Coordinator with the Kansas Volunteer Commission, in for some questions towards the end about what strategic planning looks like in our organization specifically. Sarah has a certificate in project management and has a really great perspective on how we can use strategic planning and lay the groundwork for creating effective volunteer programs. So the 12 elements of volunteer management are the essential elements that make a volunteer program most effective and sustainable for the long term. Our first step is planning. And so before developing or expanding your already existing volunteer program, it's essential to build the foundation for volunteer engagement by planning what our program will look like into the future. This is also a time that's really important to garner organizational support through the planning process, which helps create a positive culture for volunteerism throughout the entire agency, not just in the community engagement department. Our second element is volunteer position descriptions. Creating volunteer position descriptions define the work that your volunteers will be doing as specifically as possible. Position descriptions are really important because they define the work the volunteer will be doing, and they set the expectations of both the volunteer and the agency at the beginning of the relationship, which helps to mitigate risk and provides a clear understanding of the training and the support that a volunteer will receive to help them be most impactful and successful in their role with your organization. Recruitment is the process of finding and encouraging people to give their time and energy to your organization. Great recruitment targets audiences most likely to have the skills and the interests that match the volunteer positions that you have available at your organization. Screening is an opportunity to assess a volunteer's skills and determine if they're a good fit for your organization and if your organization is a good fit for the volunteer. This is a time to talk about expectations and begin to set standards about what moving forward together will look like. We take the information that we learn during the screening and then we'll place the volunteers in the most appropriate assignment based on that information. When we do screening and placement well, we're able to prevent many issues that could come up later on down the road. And we'll talk more about this element in May, I believe. Yep, in May. But screening and placement are key to volunteer retention. If you need to know more about this element or any of the elements or want resources around them before it's the scheduled webinar topic for the month, just send me an email. I'll share out my contact information again at the end of our time together today. Orientation is our opportunity to give a general overview of the organization's mission and vision, as well as any of your current programming, all of your current programming, the organization's history, the community impact, and all of the information that a volunteer will need to be successful at your organization, including all of the policies and procedures. Orientation needs to happen for every volunteer every time they come on at your organization, regardless of their assignment. This is often the volunteer's first impression of your organization, and it's a really important opportunity that we need to be sure that we're leveraging because it will set the tone for our relationship with the volunteer moving forward. While training by volunteer job description will vary, it's important that we're providing comprehensive training, initial training, as well as ongoing training throughout the duration of the volunteer service with our organizations. Oop. So supervision, volunteers need ongoing communication with staff while they're working to feel supported and successful, of course, just like our teammates do or our paid staff do. But they also need annual scheduled reviews. So that's something that we might not necessarily all be doing, but it's very important to give those opportunities for feedback. And we'll take a closer look at what supervision can look like in July. Volunteer recognition does include both informal and formal thank yous to volunteers, like appreciation events or maybe thank you cards, but it also includes a whole lot more than that. Recognition can include providing feedback, ongoing communication and support, and including volunteers in staff meetings and team decisions when it's appropriate. All of these efforts indicate and communicate the significance of the volunteers' work and what they're doing for our organizations. Coordination and communication. Effective volunteer programs have a person that can be a staff person who's paid or a volunteer whose only job it is to manage all of the details, the scheduling, assigning appropriate positions, the support, retention, and evaluation. Clear ongoing communication between the volunteer coordinator, other volunteers, staff, or the clients that we're serving is essential to establishing good working relationships among everyone involved. We have record keeping and reporting. Documenting volunteers' work, of course, assists in recruiting and training volunteers as well as fundraising. Reports of cumulative achievement with volunteers should be shared routinely with the volunteers themselves, as well as with the leadership and administration of the organization, any funding sources you have, and the community. Sometimes we forget to do that. We'll talk more about different reporting options, including ideas for sharing qualitative data with stakeholders in October. Evaluation, asking volunteers to share feedback is so important. It's a valuable way that we can evaluate our program's success, and it also reinforces that volunteers are an important part of your community and the work that you're doing. Additionally, providing feedback to volunteers about their performance can help maintain motivation and encourage personal growth and program improvement. And then finally, volunteer and salaried staff relations is a really critical piece of this puzzle. We know that using volunteers to assist paid staff requires the support of the entire organization, not just the community engagement department. It's critical that all staff understand the importance of recruiting, of screening, of placing and recognizing the volunteers, as well as the ways that volunteers can support their work specifically. It's essential that we as volunteer professionals work together with paid staff to create volunteer job positions and feedback models to ensure that we have buy-in from all staff and buy-in for the support of volunteers. Volunteer and staff relations will be the topic of our December webinar, but that's a long time away. So if this really important element is something that you need some help with, please let me know in the chat or send me an email again after our time together is over, because this is sometimes kind of tricky to get right. And I'll be exploring options for more free volunteer engagement education opportunities for Kansas throughout the year. So whatever topics you'd like to see come up as training or resources, please let me know, and we'll try to get that on our training schedule. So where to start? The engagement strategy benefits seem like no-brainers for most of our programs. We'll talk more in depth about what they are with Sarah, but we know that taking the time to create an engagement strategy helps keep your team on the same page, super important. Helps keep your team on the same page with everything that's going on, including the scheduling, the work that the volunteers are doing, the expectation of the volunteers, and really importantly, the expectations of your team related to the supervision and support of your volunteer team. Engagement strategies affirm the value of your volunteers and helps create a culture of intentionality around volunteerism throughout the organization. Creating an engagement strategy saves time in the long run because it preemptively can answer some of those questions that could give you pause later on down the road for your team. And a good engagement strategy helps you find volunteers that will be the very best fit for your organization. And finally, a great engagement strategy will give volunteers a consistent experience with equitable and fair implementation of policy and procedure that ultimately fosters a culture of reliability and earns a volunteer's trust and respect. So now where do we start? This can often be the hardest part. So we need to identify and gather the information that's needed to inform the discussion around strategic planning for your program. We need to gather qualitative and quantitative data like reports, focus groups, and surveys. A SWOT analysis is a great place to start as well. That helps you identify and clarify the current position of your program. And SWOT analysis, that stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. A cultural assessment can help your organization understand how leadership and stakeholders are involved in the organization's culture. It considers the actions, ideas, and the beliefs of leadership and your stakeholders and how that impacts your volunteer program, as well as the other programs that your organization may have in the community. We'll need to determine your timing and consider if you have a slower season that makes more sense for your strategic planning work to take place, or if your programs are more cyclical and you need to find a way to work your strategic planning into your day-to-day operations. And should you contract with outside help? This isn't a yes or no answer. This will be different for everyone. But should you engage someone from outside of your organization to be a fresh set of eyes and help with this process? So moving into your plan implementation and what that looks like, there's some questions that we need to consider as part of the process that will help make the implementation run more smoothly. Why do we want a volunteer program? When planning our volunteer program, we need to start with our why. Why do we want to bring on volunteers? Or why do we currently work with them already? Are we looking for ways to support paid staff and cut costs, or are we looking to really expand our resources? And are we looking to leverage volunteers fundamentally on every level of the organization, which will ultimately expand our capacity? What is our vision for volunteer engagement? We need to consider what our program looks like now, what it would look like if we just maintain the status quo for the next 5 years, and what it could look like. Think about what's possible around expansion of impact, identify trends in recruitment, and consider your volunteer base and opportunities for role expansion for the volunteers themselves. We don't want to be constrained by history here or funds. We want to think big in this step. Going back to the SWOT analysis, what are the opportunities? What are the weaknesses? And these are all things to consider when we're writing the vision statement that can really guide the program into the future in the way that we want it to. What are the outcomes for the organization? So here we want to create common goals. Who's going to be accountable for the program? Who will be impacted by the program? Does leadership understand the need for vision and for a vision statement and a change to the program? Does leadership know how the program impacts the organization's mission? And what work needs to be done? Is this an analysis of the program or a program evaluation? And can this work be done by the volunteer administrator and their team? And should they be doing it? Or is this, again, somewhere that we need to get some outside eyes on the program? Implementation of the volunteer engagement plan must be an organization-wide initiative to be highly successful. We want to consider who should be involved in the strategic planning and who needs to be involved. Ultimately, the team that creates this plan should be inclusive, but not overwhelming at the same time. We need to include stakeholders and leaders as well as volunteers. Volunteers should have a voice at the table. But we do need to remember here that sitting in on the strategic planning committee is not the only way to be involved in this process. There will also be opportunities for feedback, stakeholders to provide feedback, participate in work groups or focus groups, as well as committees, and attend informal meetings in town halls. So you can really be discerning about who needs to be at the table for this conversation. How will the engagement plan be communicated? This is almost as important or just as important as creating the plan itself. How will you share discussions or information about how decisions were made? We need to remember to share this information back to our stakeholders and participants, as well as the community. So taking all of that information and implementing it into a plan. We need to make our plan a reality by creating work groups or committees to begin identifying the individual actions that will really make this strategic plan a reality. We need to continue throughout this process to connect with our vision. Refer your engagement plan and goals back to your program vision, and remember that it's always okay to reevaluate as your program continues to evolve, where you're going, where you're headed. And then finally, we'll evaluate our plan, evaluate and learn from the mistakes that we may have made along the way. But it's also important to remember to share and celebrate our successes as the program grows in alignment with our organization's social mission. All right, I am going to stop sharing my screen now briefly and invite Sarah to come on. So I'd love to bring in our expert here on project management. And Sarah, I have a few questions for you as it relates to what this can look like in our organizations.
Okay.
So we've talked about some of the benefits, but why is it really important or critical that we begin our programs like this, or looking backwards that we need to firm up our objectives? Why do we need to do this?
Okay. Why create a strategic plan before implementing new programming, right? That's a really good question. Um, we don't always have a fresh start or a jumping point. We may be new to the program. The program may have been kind of flailing and we stepped in and we're not quite sure how to reassess. Maybe things aren't going so well. My goal here today is to share information with you about why strategic planning is important, the different steps. We're going to get into that, how to get buy-in from people in your organization. So I'm so excited. So why create this plan? Why is it important? Knowing the who, what, when, where, and why is critically important before starting any project or programming. If not, you could end up wasting valuable time, money, and resources spinning your wheels. I don't know if any of you have ever gone through that, but it can be a very frustrating process. It helps us to identify our goals and it sharpens our vision. It makes us decide clearly and concretely what we need to do to have the effect on society that we want. If we just stop and take a breath and really think about what it is we're doing and the impact that we want to have in our community. It helps us to make sure that we all understand our goal and what we need to do by reaching out, involving key people in the planning process. That's really important. And as you stated earlier, Haley, knowing where to start is imperative. Do you have data or other information from focus groups, community surveys, etc.? How do you know where the greatest impacts will be made if you don't have anything to back up the needs in your community? How will we measure our success? And that's another thing I know you may talk about in a later one, but that's important. You need to start that now in the planning process before you really start building this program. And what are our needs? How will we measure our success? How will we measure volunteer retention? That will help us be better in planning in the long run. And another question to ask is the culture in our organization one that supports the work and needs of this program as it currently stands? Okay. The actions, ideas, beliefs of those from everyone from leadership to the front desk can either help your program flourish or it can make it a very bumpy ride. So developing a plan for volunteer engagement can have a positive impact on retention rates and free up more of your staff's time to focus on other components outside of recruitment. Because we can get really hung up in that recruitment piece, but we want to start getting out there and doing that good work. And not only that, if your programs are well managed, it's going to aid in the effective and efficient delivery of services, increase your organization's sustainability, and improve your organization's return on investment. So that's really important.
So I feel like maybe a lot of us are in a situation where our programs are already off the ground and we're not really getting to do this from scratch. So if we just need to firm up our objectives around our program, can we do this retroactively? Is that possible?
Absolutely. Regardless of where your program is currently and whatever step we talk about, it's never too late. It's never too late to incorporate all or a few of these key items and start doing them now. It's never too late to go back. Sometimes we need to stop and really assess where we're at. It's good to have a stopping point, kind of where we bring people and kind of have conversations about what that might look like. So again, it's never too late to get started. The steps I'm going to talk about, you could take them in order. You might want to take one piece of it and say, we're really great in all these areas, but this one specific one is where we really need to work on.
And before we get to those steps, so I talked about some questions that you need to consider. Do you have any others, or what are the questions that you would be considering if you're working to do this work?
Okay, one thing you brought up earlier, and it kind of stuck with me is, and this may be a hard question to ask. We might feel embarrassed. We might feel like, oh, I feel like I should know what I'm doing, but nothing is really coming together. Maybe I need a fresh set of eyes, or maybe I'm overthinking it, or maybe sometimes I get caught up in being a perfectionist. I get too into the weeds, and I need someone to help me see the big picture so I can get refocused. So, do we feel confident that we can do this with the current program leadership? That's a hard question. Sometimes organizations can have a lot of turnover for a variety of reasons, so there's not always seasoned staff around. Do we need to bring someone in from another successful organization that can mentor us through the process? And I know you talked a little bit about that, and there is no shame in doing that. It is not a failure. Believe me, it's just like, and I have found most nonprofits are always good about helping each other, giving each other helpful tips and tricks, or calling a program and saying, this was so successful. I'm so impressed. Tell me how you did it. I think there is a lot to be said in asking for help, and there is no shame in doing so. Another big question to ask before you start is, what hurdles have we faced in the past, and what can we use as a learning opportunity and prevent that from happening again? I want you guys to keep that in the back of your mind as we talk about this. And a lot of times we try to reinvent the wheel when we can just improve on the wheel. We can just make it better. What is our goal with this specific program? And what do we want to see in regard to impact? So again, something to think about before we go into these steps I'm going to talk about. How will we measure and track that in the long run? And why is data so important? I come the last 7 years of my life being a very data-oriented person. And one thing that I find is that data tells a story. It tells the who, what, when, where, why. It will tell you where you need to start, where the greatest needs are. It will help you stay on track. It will help you track your volunteerism hours. I mean, get some processes in place. And it'll help you see where you want to go in the future. And I think that's really exciting. So having a plan and getting people on board, and I'll talk more about buying in a little bit, is so important.
And then after we've started, we have a good grasp of those questions, those fundamental considerations. Where
Sure.
where do we go? What are the steps? How do we do this?
Okay. And like Haley said, I have a project management background. So one thing that I can do that a skill that I have is I'm able to see a big picture, and then I can see where all the pieces need to go in and all the different players. And you want to really compound on people's strengths. What are they good at? Maybe do a survey. Maybe it's been a long time. Maybe there are some different attributes and some skills and talents that people have that you haven't tapped into before. Okay. So the first thing I want to talk about is understanding your volunteers and goals. So one thing that's important, if your volunteers feel closely aligned with your organization's mission and goals, they will contribute. They will come back and they will show up. You need to understand exactly what motivates them to contribute. And when recruiting volunteers, explore their intent, their interests, and skills to get a sense of how you can create appealing opportunities for them. How do we get them to keep coming back? I know someone talked about, I want to say it was Lexi, wanting to work on volunteer appreciation, which when people feel appreciated, whether it's at work, volunteerism, in a relationship, we are going to do our best and we are going to give our best. And I truly believe that. We don't all need a medal or a cookie or a pat on the back, but let me tell you, showing your appreciation goes a long way. And it could just be a simple thank you, or doing a highlight or a spotlight within your organization. That's so important. Another thing I want to talk about, and we talked about a little bit before, Haley, is determine how you will measure engagement. And measuring success really looks different for every organization. That is really something that must be defined when creating a volunteer engagement strategy. Does success mean having a large number of supporters that volunteer short term? Does it mean having volunteers complete a certain number of volunteer shifts per month? Or is it worth considering what success looks like to your organization so your goals will be reflected in your volunteer engagement strategy? That's another real thing, important thing to think about. The third thing is to define what long-term success looks like to your organization. And when you're thinking about your goals, while you set your metrics, you'll also want to factor in what successful long-term engagement looks like. And I think that's most of our goal, right? We want to keep volunteers, we want to keep them engaged. Long-term engagement will absolutely create lasting relationships. It transforms volunteers into donors, and I can tell you that is true. You get them hook, line, and sinker. And to create a community that encourages more people to become involved with your mission. If you get your volunteers psyched out for what you're doing, they're going to talk about it on Facebook. They're going to talk about it with their friends. They're going to talk about it with their family. And before you know it, you are going to have an incredibly robust, successful volunteer engagement program, because the more you invest in the volunteers you have, the more they will go out into the community and bring more volunteers to you. And one other thing I want to talk about, this is step 4, and this might be hard sometimes when you're in the thick of things, but you're going to want to identify weak spots in the engagement life cycle. Walk through volunteer engagement life cycle and identify weak spots. So that means as you start to measure the performance of your volunteer program, take a good look at your current volunteer engagement life cycle. Where can you make improvements? Implementing even the smallest of changes can have a major impact on the longevity of your overall engagement cycle. So maybe if you find that your volunteers are burnout and uninterested in their work, which happens sometimes, we get fatigued, right? Integrate more opportunities for communication and feedback. And I know you touched on that earlier, Haley. That's really important. Maybe even consider upgrading your recognition programs and finding better ways to show volunteers your appreciation. And I promise you that goes a really long way. The fifth thing to remember is to optimize the onboarding process. Remember that your volunteers have committed themselves to your mission and goals. So you want to make sure they're really clear. And Haley, I think you mentioned, when people start, even if it's been a while, talk about your mission statement, talk about your vision statement, make sure they're really feeling that in their soul. Sorry, I'm really passionate about volunteering, but make sure they feel that, because if they can feel that, they're going to carry that vibe with them. And just, really being encouraging and talking with excitement and all the things the future holds is going to help them, stay involved and stay engaged. Invest in the right volunteer tools. And the tools you choose to support your engagement will prove to be a game changer for your volunteer engagement strategy. As your organization continues to grow, the number of volunteers interested in supporting your mission will increase. I talked a little bit about that. Ensure that you have the proper tools and resources to stay ahead of the curve. Okay. Real quick, expand your opportunities and ideas, explore additional offerings and strategies to keep them engaged. Maybe if you do a survey, maybe they'll think about some things you didn't. Like I said, we don't always see things with a big picture, and surveys, I hate to say it, I'm going to say it again, surveys are critical and they really help. It helps you to decide where you need to start from, how much you've grown, and what you can do to plan for the future. Okay. Strengthen communication. That's another thing you talked about, Haley. That is so important. Reinforcing the process with communication helps to create a successful volunteer engagement strategy. It requires giving your volunteers It gives them the space to connect with your organization and with each other. So maybe having a mixer on one evening, having stakeholders come in, have the board come in, have different volunteers come in, make it feel, you know, exciting and fun, and keeps them engaged and involved. Keeping an open line of communication with your volunteers is absolutely essential. Even sending text reminders about volunteer shifts, automated email reminders for your events, that will help to reduce no-shows and embrace communication that channels that community. And the last thing, a piece of advice I have is to check on progress. Again, surveys and data. I'm sorry, I'm going to say it again. And it's really important because whenever you want to check in on your program, it'll help you keep up with your progress by sending out surveys and collecting data that will allow you to continuously adapt your volunteer engagement strategy. There is no better way to gauge your success than by leveraging the critical volunteer data that you gather. And you want to keep historical data also. So make sure, sometimes we have a lot of turnover and that information leaves with that person, right? No one kept any notes. There's no kind of book. There's no kind of desk manual. And that's another good piece of advice I could give you. Have your staff kind of stop, and it's hard to stop, but leave notes, leave charts, leave graphs, leave spreadsheets, whatever you can. Put that in your policies and procedures, okay? Because you don't want all the expertise walked out the door and there's no note left. There's nothing left.
Those are all really helpful steps and gives us such a good picture of like how we actually what we actually need to do. So when we're
Absolutely.
considering doing these things, like who needs to be part of that conversation?
Okay. Gosh, this can be really tricky because you don't want too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Everyone at your organization and key stakeholders could possibly have a seat at the table. Each person brings a different perspective. Some may see a really focused view, while others may have a big picture view. And I find, again, that doing surveys both internally within your organization and in your community will help keep you on the right path. And it might be anyone from people on your board, stakeholders, people in your community, maybe people you've partnered with before very successfully. Bring them in and start having conversations. I think that's really important. That does not need to fall on one person's shoulders. Maybe there's only 2 or 3 of you, and that's really hard when you're trying to run an organization with just a really small staff. Please get people from the community, get those people that know who you are, that know your heart, that know your vision, and bring them in and help let them be part of your strategic planning team.
Yeah, I feel like just as humans, sometimes we forget to call on, our support. And yeah, that's just one of our pitfalls.
Absolutely. Because I think a lot of us in this line have kind of the same personalities, and we want to carry everything in the world on our shoulders, because not that we want to be martyrs, but it's like, I want to do all this, but it's like, whew,
I
breathe,
need
take a
help. Yeah.
step back, and it's okay to say, I need help. It's okay to say, I am lost, or I am so into this, or I'm feeling exhausted. I just can't see a clear picture right now, and I could really use some help, and that is okay. And if you don't want to do that to somebody else, you can do that with us. We are a safe space. I promise you that.
How can we get buy-in? How can the planning team get buy-in from stakeholders and other team members before program
Okay.
implementation?
Okay, I'm going to try not to get too windy. I'm sorry. I always have a lot to say, so please forgive me. I hope you all are still awake and engaged with this. Engage them as early as possible. Don't catch them off guard. Don't try to keep things a secret. Get them involved. So the first thing you want to do is, real quick, I just wanted to find, and this is not meant to be insulting. I know you guys know, But stakeholder refers to anyone, individual, or group that has an interest in your nonprofit, okay? It includes people directly involved, maybe such as board members, people you serve, donors, foundations that give you grants. Those are some good places to pull people in and get some ideas. So again, all of these individuals and groups can be affected by what your organization does or even help determine what your nonprofit does. So the first thing you want to do when you want to get buy-in, right? And sometimes that is a struggle because everyone's got different ideas. I talked about at the beginning, is the culture at our organization one that allows our programs to thrive, okay? So you want to formulate a clear vision, go in with the clear plan. The initial step on getting buy-in is to develop a clear vision of what you want to introduce. So know the who, what, when, where, and why of the specific program and why you want to get it off the ground. Okay. My second tip would be to invite others' ideas. Maybe we think we have it all covered. Our ideas are the best. I'm not saying that's any of you, but invite others to give their ideas. Get some popcorn going around. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? So-and-so did this. Let's see what they did. Doing that will entail inviting your audience to improve your idea through criticism and opinions. And that is not always easy. I have to keep it real here for a second, okay? Open yourself up to constructive criticism. That's really important. And sometimes it's just mean-hearted and we don't like that. But sometimes, oh, I didn't see things that way, or maybe I didn't remember that. So getting buy-in may involve some component of co-creation, which can help secure commitment. It'll energize your stakeholders, your management. It'll get them excited. So get excited. Again, the vibe is real. If you are the one getting buy-in comes from attitude. That is the number one thing, okay? You are the vibe. You want to get them excited to come in and buy into what you're doing and your ideas. So, but also inviting other people's ideas may make them feel a part of the process. And I think that's also important. Even if they're not going to be really hands-on, they're going to remember, I had something to do with that. That was my idea, which makes people feel good, right? And they're going to give you your continued support. Leverage feedback. Use the team's feedback to improve the original idea. So you take it to your stakeholders. They gave you some ideas. And try to incorporate some of them into your own, okay? So people may be more likely to commit to action if they feel like their ideas are part of a plan. It's kind of a psychological trick, okay? So maybe not all the feedback you get is going to become part of the plan, but it's vital to acknowledge everyone who contributed by saying, our plan. That's how you're going to get buy-in. The way you communicate can help show others that the vision is not from an individual, but it is the product of a team effort. And I think most of us really want to feel like we're part of a team, right? That's how we get people's buy-in. And communicate your progress. That would be another piece of advice. So to make people continue to be part of your vision, keep them updated about the process. If there are milestones achieved, you can communicate them to the team and help motivate them. I think that's so important. Keep people excited. It's hard to keep that momentum. Maybe when you're already feeling kind of downtrodden about or depressed about or, kind of defeated, keep that up. One thing I want to remind you of, there could be some concerns or resistance, but you can collaborate with them to address these issues. So a good starting point might be to ask the team what you can do to make them comfortable with the planner process.
And Sarah, my last question that I have for you, so as we're going through this process, how can we ensure that all of the steps that we're taking are continuously in alignment with our vision?
Okay. My first piece of advice, and I'm saying this as a project manager, is to have someone be the project manager. You don't have to have special certification or training, I promise you. But say you have several different programs running at the same time, right? Maybe we have a food distribution, then we have a clothing distribution, then we have an after school program. There's like all these programs within our organization, right? Someone needs to manage what is happening, the volunteers, who will train them, who is responsible for what. Make sure that is concrete and in writing, and not just that it's all on Amanda or Haley or Aspen or Sarah or Tierney or whoever. That's going to be a team effort, but someone needs to lead that change and that challenge. Okay, make sure things are written down, that we're staying on task. Set clear organizational goals. And where does goal alignment start? It starts at the top. Okay, that's really important. We talked about that buy-in and getting that buy-in from leadership, and then communicating your goals on every level and making sure that things aren't slowing you down. One term we use in project management is scope creep. So this is the scope of our project, but but this is a good idea, and this is a good idea, and what about this? You might have to say no. I have a hard time saying no, but if I keep saying yes to all this, I'm not going to be successful and achieve all those goals and be successful in all that planning we just did. So don't let scope creep come in and derail you.
As an idea person, like that speaks to my heart. Like sometimes it just kind of can get out of line.
Absolutely,
Ah,
and I'm that way. My mind runs a million. I swear, it's part of having attention deficit disorder, and let me tell you, it's real. My mind is constantly going. I constantly have ideas. I'm in the shower. I'm doing the dishes. I'm like, I need to carry a recorder with me. But sometimes all those ideas, if we don't kind of start to minimize, it gets out of control. It gets too big because we have great ideas. We want to do this and make changes, but let's start small. Let's keep it together. Let's keep it all in. And once we perfect this, we can continue to grow and grow and grow. And we'll get more volunteers, and our engagement will get better, and our appreciation will get better. And before you know it, we are just absolutely flourishing.
I love that. I'd like to take a few minutes to open up the floor to questions for you or for me, from any of our participants today.
Sure thing.
And if you have a question, you're welcome to just go ahead and unmute and come on.
I don't have a question, but just wanted to say thank you for your insights. And as a director, like you said, it can be difficult trying to balance and keep that focus. So I think you had some really great points, and I appreciate that.
Absolutely. You know what? Burnout is real. Carrying the load is real, right? And that's why in some of our organizations, we get some turnover, right? Because it's like, I'm so frustrated. I can't get by it. I don't know what that means. So again, stop, reevaluate, take a breath, call the Kansas Volunteer Commission, and we'll help you.
I'm going to check the chat before we move on to make sure there's not any questions there. Okay, I'm not seeing any, but I would like to reiterate what Sarah just mentioned. Please use this as a resource. We'll share some other ways that you can utilize our team. But if you have questions about, again, any of the elements, any of the planning element we discussed today, or have questions about any of the other elements or educational resources, we are always happy to help and just an email away. All right, I will share my screen again and go through some housekeeping that I'd like to share with you all before we end our time together. All right, the Kansas Volunteer Commission, our Vision is to empower all Kansans to meet community need through service. The Commission's primary role is to provide resources and leadership to support all of your local initiatives that tackle any community need. As the State Service Commission, we direct effective national service programs and provide resources and training to advance volunteerism, mentoring, and civic engagement. Our 2023 webinar series is threefold. Tierney Kirkdahl, who is on the call, is leading the Mentor webinar series. That will be on the first Thursday of every month from 1 to 2. You can register for that at the Zoom link listed on this slide, and that's also on our social media as well and in our newsletter. The volunteer engagement webinar, this one is the second Tuesday of every month from 10 to 11. And we'll continue to go through those 12 steps of effective volunteer engagement. And then the civic engagement webinar series is with Dr. Jessica Dorsey on the third Friday of every month from 12 to 1. So all great informational sessions to sit in on. Our 2023 mini grant series was released at the end of last year. Our mentor capacity building grant just closed. Our volunteer manager support grant is open through applications are due March 1st, and I'll say a little bit more about that and what that grant looks like in just a few minutes. But these are all of the grants that we'll be releasing this year: the Youth Civic Engagement Grant, the Social Justice Capacity Building, 9/11 National Day of Service, the Rural and Indigenous Communities Mini Grant, and then finally the MLK National Day of Service Grant, which will be for MLK projects for 2024. Our upcoming events include a really exciting challenge. The Give Back Kansas Challenge is an 8-week challenge running from April 17th through June 9th to engage Kansans in employer-supported volunteerism, both during and outside the workday. You can find more information at the link provided in this flyer, or go to canserve.org and then click Take Action on our website. The Volunteer Manager Support Mini Grant is actually running now through March 1st. And this mini grant is for training to enhance the volunteer experience in Kansas. The activities included in this grant should lead to an individual's attainment of new knowledge or skills to improve their volunteer experience. That could look like CPR training or mentor training, mental health or first aid training. And it should lead to improved performance while volunteering as well. So that's another option. So that could look like trainings to prevent compassion fatigue, which is a very real thing, for example. This can also look like training to increase the capacity of volunteer managers to better support their volunteers. And activities should lead to the individual's attainment of new knowledge or skill to better manage volunteers, which would include volunteer recruitment or the ability to retain, for example. Or the training should lead to improved performance in managing volunteers, like inspiring volunteers or improved communication, etc. So lots of options for that mini grant to fit into your program. I'm very excited to see what you all come up with. Our next volunteer engagement webinar will be March 14th, easy to remember, from 10 to 11. And then the element that we'll be talking about next time is volunteer position descriptions. You can stay connected with us by visiting our website, www.canserve.org. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter. And then we'd love to be part of any community groups that you're affiliated with. Invite us to come present to anyone who might benefit from the Commission's resources. And then, of course, you can follow us on social media as well. We have Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Thank you all so much for being with us today. We're happy to get to spend this time with you and look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon and happy Love Day.